Hi, my name's Russell. I'm an alcoholic. And I'm a member of the South Dixie Zoom virtual group, whatever it is. It's good to be here. It's good to be back from Buffalo. Someone, yes, Braden asked me, so how was Buffalo? I said, it was pretty much Buffalo. Oh, Lord. No, it was good. We went up there and I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. I'm going to mention a few things about Buffalo. I was honored to be able to speak at their 84th annual AA convention. I mean, I think AA is 90 years old. I'm not even sure. They must have started before the big book was written or something. I don't know what's going on up there with them, but they're very, very nice people. I hate, flying to places, especially when they're not nonstop. I hate all the travel. I'm not young like I used to be. But I mean, once I get up there and meet the people were great. And I ran into quite a few people there were quite a few people in Buffalo that came over from Akron, Ohio. Apparently it's only like 3 hours away. So you get a lot of Ohio people and stuff like that. So it was very nice. And I had a good time. I'll talk a little bit about that. So I understand whoever came in last didn't do step 6. And didn't, so I'm going to sort of mush in, all my steps are 6 and 7 anyway, so you won't notice much of a difference, but I'm sort of going to focus a little bit on that deal. And I'm going to elevate, did I say I was an alcoholic? I mean.
I think it's a given.
Yeah, but I am. But in any event, so I'm going to focus a little bit about that, but I'm actually going to elevate the group a little bit. And I'm going to turn into I'm going to do a little masterpiece theater. I wish I had an English accent because I'm going to read a poem to you by Robert Frost. I've always loved this poem, which has something to do with something. I don't know. You're going to have to, it's going to be like Pulp Fiction. I'm going to go all over the place. Why should I do all the work, It doesn't matter when I say anything. You're gonna hear what you're gonna hear. If you hear anything, it'll probably be something I didn't even say. You'll put it all together, and usually people come to me and says, "Oh man, when you said the chicken was on the roof, oh man," and I didn't even say the chicken's on the roof. It's like an hour talk, and they remember like one. Oh, what about the rest of the talk? I just like that one sentence, But so in any event, I'm gonna read this thing from Robert Frost called The Road Less Traveled. Have you guys ever heard The Road Less Traveled? It's also called Two Roads Diverged to a Yellow Wood, but I'm going to read that, which has something to do with whether or not you're going to stay sober. This has something to do with whether how in the big book they say later on clear-cut directions are given as to how we did this thing or something. You ever see that line in the big book? I think did I do the talk on sentences? There's all these clear-cut sentences in the big book, but nobody knows what I never did the sentence.
You did?
I did.
Yeah.
They didn't hear it. But they have all these clear-cut sentences in the big book. But the problem with alcoholics is, this is the old God as you understand him. And my wife gave me a caricature of myself. It's like written by an artist. I actually put it on my Zoom thing sometimes, and it just looks like me. But it looks like me and sort of like Brad Pitt. It's hard to explain. I wish I could put it up there. It looks like me, but I'm better looking in the painting. But in any event, I think I'm a little thinner. I'm not sure what it is, but so somebody said the other day, he says, man, that's a good painting of you. I said, yeah, well, that's me as I understand me. I mean, it really looks like me, but it's like a little bit off. You know what I mean? It's like me if I was Brad Pitt. You understand what I'm saying? And unfortunately, look, let me tell you something. I'm in my 45th year of sobriety, and I've changed. You learn a lot. You'll learn a lot. Coming up on 45 years, you learn a lot. You sponsor a lot of people, you hang around AA, you You take a lot of slips and falls. And get beat up a lot of, what are they called? How do we change again? The perception? It's the Alzheimer's. It's repeated humiliations and the crushing of ourselves. You guys are mostly sober, but, if you're sober, you've probably experienced even sober repeated humiliations. Have you guys ever crushing of yourself? That never stops. It never stops. I'm telling you, it doesn't stop. But thank God it doesn't stop. The Apostle Paul said, to keep me from becoming conceited. He wrote 13 books out of the Bible. I mean, if you're going to be a Christian, you want to be like the Apostle Paul. He said, to keep me from becoming conceited, God gave me a thorn in my flesh. He never says what the thorn is. We don't know what it was. But it was something really bad. He said it was like satanic, a messenger of Satan. He asked God to remove it, to remove the thorn. And God said, he said, I won't take it away from you. He says, my grace will be sufficient for you to overcome this. You're going to have me, you're going to be hugging on to me for the rest of your life because I'm keeping that thorn because it's to keep you from becoming conceited. And then he says this line, because this has a lot to do with what we're going to talk about. This has a lot to do with really what they're talking. He says, this is what God says. If you really want to, if you ever want to get from God as you understand him, which is a God that looks a lot like, it's like me in that photograph. A God, if you ever want to go from the God that you like, the God that you're comfortable with, to the real deal. You understand? If you ever want to go to the God that you're comfortable with, the one who has all power, that has all power, and will help you overcome all your problems. You ever want to go to that God, away from the God that you like. You understand what I'm saying? Because the God that you understand him to be may not be the real deal. It may just be the God that you want to settle for because it doesn't make you uncomfortable. I'm just saying shit. I'm probably wrong. This is stuff that I've learned. If you learn stuff over a period of 45 years of being pounded, you see, I always have that voice in my mind. Should I tell them the truth? Or should I just say things so they'll like me? And since I got, that thing they say in the book, the promise, remember that promise they say in the book, you'll lose fear of people? You don't worry about what people, I used to say that all the time in the bars. I don't give a shit what they think about me. I was usually drunk when they said that. I don't give a shit, because that's the kind of thing, because I'm delusional. I can't separate the truth from the false. My alcoholic thinking seems the only one, so I like to tell myself things. I like to say things. I like to talk to myself. Because I like to have an intelligent conversation. So I like to say things like, I don't give a shit what people think about it. I like to say that a lot. Especially, it's really good to tell yourself that crap, especially when for the last 3 hours you've been worried about what people are going to think about you. But, you just sort of like bullshit yourself. You tell yourself you don't care. You're John Wayne, you're Brad Pitt. You tell yourself stupid stuff. But, what happens is, over a period of time, my perception of God, my perception of myself has changed. That's the funny thing, when your perception of God changes, your perception of yourself changes, your perception of the people around you changes, your perception changes about everything. So I've learned a lot of stuff. So, so whenever I speak to a group of people, whether it's here, whatever, Buffalo, Bali, Indonesia, wherever the hell I am, I just talk about where I'm at that time. I can't give the talk that I gave when I had 30 years because I've actually learned a lot. I've changed a lot between 30 years and 45. You understand what I'm saying? I can't give the talk that I gave when I had 10 years, because I've changed a lot. And so I can only give you the talk I'm giving now. I can't dumb it down. I can't, so I just say what I say and you can take it or leave it, but I'm just an average alcoholic. I'm not a special alcoholic. I'm a average alcoholic. And so you don't have to get mad at it. It may not apply to you at all. But it's, I'll put it this way. I'm a product of doing the steps and sponsoring people and doing all the stuff you're supposed to do. And I've just lasted for a bunch of time. And, you can take it or leave it. Or you may find, though, whether you disagree with, even if you disagree with me, that somewhere down the road, if you stay sober, maybe at 20 years or 25 or 30 years, you may find yourself in a situation where you're experiencing a lot of the stuff that I'm actually talking about. You say, oh, That's what that son of a bitch was talking about it. Then you'll owe me an amends, but I'll probably be deceased by then. So you'll have to figure out how to give me a posthumous amends. You can do that, by the way, you know? But that's okay. I forgive you anyway. Don't worry about it. I'm fine with it. I don't have any, thank God I don't have any, you know, I remember when I was a couple of years sober, I realized, I don't know, it came on me like an epiphany that I had all these people living rent-free in my head. Like whatever I was bothered by, there'd always be a face. I mean, I had all these people living rent-free in my head of people that I was either mad at or jealous of, or I didn't like what they did, or it was unfair or something like that. I said, man, I got all these people. And this is doing the steps, you still have people. And how do you get rid of the people, you know? I'm thinking bad things about myself and other people. Sober, I don't need alcohol to hurt people. Most people I heard in my life, I did Cold Stone sober. Alcohol, the only thing alcohol did for me, allowed me to live with my sorry ass self and go ahead and do it. You know what I mean? I would probably put a bullet in my head if I didn't have alcohol by the time I was 21, but alcohol would fix that. But there reached a time where alcohol stopped working. But in any event, so I go up to Buffalo and I saw something very interesting up there. And I'll show you how your perception changes. I'll give you an example, just a wild example. So I'll give you one little example of how my perception may be different than your perception. Not because I'm better or worse, but just because it's the way I perceive things now. So they had a countdown. Have you guys ever gone to a count? You know what a countdown is? Yeah. I still like countdowns. I don't like them as much as I used to like them, but one of the reasons I like watching them is because it seems that nobody can really do them right, you know. There's a way of doing, but whether it's right or wrong, I like watching them and everything. But I used to love them, you know. And where they figure out there's like 500 or 600 people, they figure out who has the least amount of sobriety, and there's some guy in the back with like 30 minutes. He had a drink on the way into the room, and then there's a guy who's got like 55 years or something. And you know, when I first came to AA, you know, the first, let's say 10 years or so, 15, something like that. You know, you get to go to all these conventions, and you go to the internationals. I went to 5 or 6 international conventions, and you see 50,000 people in one room saying the Lord's Prayer. You know, 50,000 people saying the Serenity Prayer. You go into the room and they're packed, and there's people, and you know, they're going to AA parties, and they're going on AA cruises. Everything's AA, everything's rah-rah AA, you know. And everybody's in this like AA little cult coffin thing, you know. Oh, you can't read from that. Is it conference approved? That's not conference approved. You know what I mean? I think he violated tradition. And there's a tradition violation, you know what I mean? It's just all a bunch of tight asses, you know what I mean? Worrying about that sort of shit. You know, like, you know, by the way, there's one of the sentences is there is one who has all power, that one is God, may you find him now. And God, the one you want to find, trust me, you want to find this guy, doesn't give a rat's ass about the traditions, because he was around long before the traditions. He doesn't even care about the big book. No, he's got a book, but you know, you'll have to figure that one out. But in any event, God, you see, because you start thinking that, and this is what Bill Wilson wrote about. If you ever want to see what he was talking about when he had 23 years and almost put a bullet in his head, you know, he was doing the LSD thing, and he went down the hills when he wrote a book. Not a book, an essay called The Next Frontier, Emotional Sobriety. He said perhaps because he was seeing all these old timers that were like basket cases. They were not, they had the ability to say, well, an old timer back then would have been 23 years, you know, and all these old timers that had passed the drinking test. And so they could pick up a 23-year medallion or a 20-year medallion. Yeah, by the way, here's another sentence in the big book. How's this for a sentence? You know, see, the paragraphs are easy. See, I'm a lawyer. So you give me a paragraph, I'll find the loophole. Give me a paragraph, I'll find the loophole. I'll find a way of saying, well, yeah, that's what you think it means, but this is what I think it means. But sentences are tough. That's when you separate the men from the boys. That's when you separate, you know, the spiritual kindergarten from the real deal. The sentences are the problem. because it's hard to bullshit the sentences. The sentences are rough. God is everything, or he's nothing. There is one that has all power, that one is God. God is everything, or he's nothing. What's your decision going to be? But if you can take, like, let's say an appendix, like we'll call it appendix 2. If you can add an appendix 2 to that, it's sort of like it's like a chaser, like you get straight scotch when you give a water chaser or something. If you can somehow water that down with an appendix 2, which essentially says, whatever the hell you want to do, whatever you want to do, it doesn't matter. All that stuff I said, what does it say? What does it say about atheism? What did Dr. Bob say? If you're an atheist, an agnostic, or some sort of spiritual pride that keeps you from understanding what we're trying to get to you, tell you in this deal, I feel sorry for you. Your heavenly Father will never let you down. So that's a sentence, okay? That's a sentence that has not, it doesn't even sound like a nice sentence. Does that sound like nice to you? It's the last thing Dr. Bob said. If you're an atheist or an agnostic, or have some sort of spiritual pride that keeps you from understanding what the hell we're trying to tell you, I feel sorry for you. Your heavenly Father will never let you down. That's a sentence. But then what you could do is you could take you could add a few more sentences to that on the top and on the bottom. You could add an appendix 2 to that. And then it sounds like, do whatever the hell you want to do. It doesn't matter. You could say in the book, for instance, here's a sentence. The sentence is something like it says, you've got to abandon this idea of atheism and agnosticism must be abandoned. That's the sentence, or burn it into the mind of every alcoholic, job or no job, wife or no wife. He can stay sober as long as he trusts God, cleans house. That's a sentence, right? But you can put a whole bunch of things around that, you know what I mean? And then it's kind of, so you can have people that say, oh yeah, I read the book. I've read the book many times, but they just never read the sentences, because the sentences that they don't like, they sort of skip over and they get sort of like the gist. But the gist of the book is like me saying, yeah, that's me as I understand them. It's not the real deal. The real deal, you fine tune the God thing. What happens, the way the God thing is fine tuned based upon the punches and the hurts and the pains and the crushings you get as you try to stay sober through life. You can bullshit yourself for a certain period of time, but life is fucking difficult. Cancer is not easy. Being broke is not easy. Being alone is not easy. And just because, and here's a sentence. How about this? I like this sentence. Drinking is but a symptom of the problem. Drinking. Have you guys ever been to a meeting where they talk about drinking a lot? They say, don't drink. Even if assholes talk, don't drink and go to meetings. They do a lot of things about drinking. People get up and they tell their drinking story. Nobody's drinking, but they tell their drunk log anyway, for the newcomer. It's good for the old time, good newcomer. But did you know that drinking's not even the problem? Did you know that? You know this, you remember they said, rarely have seen person fail who's thoroughly followed our path? They said that in the big book. That was published in 1939. Their path was what they did between 35 and 39. That was 4 years. And they didn't have to worry about so much about the first step. You know why? Because they were all low-bottom drunks. So they all volunteered. They said, please help me. You didn't have to talk them into it. Or as the Cleveland guy said, Clarence, the brewmaster, as he said, I did what I was ordered to do. There were no suggestions. And back then, we don't do that. We don't do any of this stuff anymore. None of it. We don't do what they did back between 35 and, because here's what they do back then. These guys were so desperate. They were so desperate that when they were told, this is the way they did it, to go, when they said, I want to go to the meetings, in order to go to the meeting, you had to get on your knees in front of everybody that was already in the group and give your life to God. Did you know that? The entry, there was no picking up white chips. The ante into the meetings, what got you into the meetings so they could see you, it says, no one is so discredited to be cordially welcomed in Alcoholics Anonymous as long as he means business. The way they figured out if you meant business is if you got on your knees in front of everybody else who was in AA and you gave your life to God. So the way of getting into the meeting, so they knew you were serious, is to do the third step in front of everybody, which is humbling. I'm sure there are people here right now that if I said, in order to stay here, you're going to have to get on your knees and give your life to God, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of people that will walk out and say, I don't want to hear this shit. But yet, they didn't have a lot of people standing up and said, you ever been doing a meeting where a guy says, well, if they had pushed God on me, I would have walked out of here. I said, you wouldn't have even been here. You got guys all over AA saying, don't talk about God, you're killing newcomers. You know? This has nothing to do with what they were doing between 1935 and 1939. Read Dr. Bob, the good old timers. So here's this sentence. A sentence says, it says, drinking is but a symptom of the disease. So everything we talk about in AA, 9% of the stuff we talk about in AA, I shouldn't say talk about, that we emphasize in AA, in meetings, because you really focus on the newcomer, which is not necessarily bad or good, it's just it is. Everything we focus on in AA has to do with the symptom. That's why Bill Wilson, in 23 years sobriety, was going through the depression. He said, I don't understand what's going on here. And he said, I don't know what's going on. What's wrong with me? Sometimes you'll find, for some people it hits at 5 years, some people at 10 years, some people at 15, 20 years. You get to one, you have all this time, and you're unhappy with your sobriety. You're unhappy because, you know why? Because the book says, the sentence says, our drinking is but a symptom of the disease. So whatever you're suffering from now, if you're worried about people and what they're going to think about you, if you have fear, if you have anxiety, if you're worried about money, it says, fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. Whatever you're worried about, whatever is keeping you from being happy and having joy in your life, has nothing to do with alcohol. You know why? Because there's this other sentence. Drinking is but a symptom of disease. The real disease centers in your mind. So if you focus on the alcohol, it's a nice thing to focus on. I'm glad they did. What happens is you may miss the real disease, just like you may miss the real God. You may miss the real disease. You understand? That's the deal. Because you may be doing the God of your imagination, and then you come up with imaginary sobriety. You know, it's something like that kind of deal. So in any event, so that has nothing to do with, by the way, that has nothing to do with what I wanted to talk about. So you can forget, don't even get worried about that, okay? But, so here, I'm going to read, I got to read this. Let me get this out of the way. This is the masterpiece. This is the poem, which has something to do, maybe, with sobriety. Okay, this is called Road Less Traveled. Okay, this is Robert Frost. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And being one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. You got to see there's two roads. So which one do I take? Then took the other just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, you got the two roads, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, now here we go. I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. Okay, here's the deal that applies to you. This is going to decide whether or not you drink it 15 years or 10. Because I know, based upon statistics, there's a whole bunch of people here who are going to drink. I'm not saying anybody here is going to drink, but statistically, most of y'all are not going to make it. It's just not going to happen. I'm just telling statistically. Now, I can tell you guys are much more spiritual. You're all spiritual, not religious. I get you're a very spiritual group here, so you'll probably all do okay, But on some groups, I always get, just in case, I always know that there's going to be, I know because I've seen a few things. What's that farmer's commercial? We know a lot because we've seen a lot. Because what happens is over 45 years, I've gone from the point where I'm, oh, wow, about AA. I know everybody's going to stay sober forever. So I know that only maybe 1/2 of 1%, 1 over 200 is going to stay sober for 40 years or 30 years. You see, I know because I've seen a lot. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. I took the narrow road. Don't take the broad highway where everybody goes, and then take the narrow road where I took the narrow road, and that's made all the difference. And this is a matter of choices. So what the 6th step says is this is the step that separates the men from the boys. That's a sentence. It separates the men from the boys. There's going to be a separation in AA. So I looked at this countdown in Buffalo, and I used to look at all these people staying sober. And so they did the countdown in Buffalo. And the way they did the countdown is they started at like 60 years. Is there anybody with 60 years? Stand up. Nobody. Anybody with 50 years? 60 years, stand up. Everybody with, then they went down 59, 58. I didn't like this. It takes a long time. 57, 56, 55. One guy stood up. Everybody clapped for him. 54, 53, 52, 51, 50, 49. One guy stood up. Okay. 48, 47, 46, 45. I stood up. Okay. No, I didn't stay. I stood up at 44 because I'm going to make 45th year, but instead of 44, 43 guys stood, 42, 41, 40, 2 people stood up, 39, 38, it goes all the way down, and then around 25 or so, then 4 people stood up, 24, and went down. As it went down lower, it says more and more people stood up, everybody stood up. So you see, so now I look at that, you see, and so I look at countdowns differently. And when I look at countdowns, I see that nobody's staying sober. I see what Bill Wilson saw at 23 years. You see, I look at it, when I had 2 years, everybody was staying sober forever, ever. Because you can't tell. Every once in a while, a guy comes up, or you'll hear a story, he says, well, I've been around AA for 20 years, but I had 20 years and then I drank. And you'll hear that stuff, but it'll go like right over your head. Because that's never going to happen to you. Because the only reason people drink is because they stop going to meetings, and you're never going to stop going to meetings. You know what I mean? So that'll never happen to you. That's like a rare thing, right? People having time and drinking. But the truth is, it's not a rare thing. It's the rule. The exception to the rule is people that stay sober after 20 years. That's the exception to the rule. And what Bill Wilson noticed in that essay, The Next Frontier, Emotional Sobriety, is that you had a lot of old timers that had gone through the booze test, but they weren't happy with their sobriety. And so I know, you can ask Pat Rogan about this, that whenever I'm speaking to a group, there's some guy there with 10 years who's going to be drunk in the next year and he doesn't even realize it. It's going to happen. You know why? Because of his choices. Because he didn't take the road less traveled. So the 6th step, the one that says this is the step that separates the men from the boys, so it says, well, what divides people out? And this is what the 6th step says. Here's a sentence for you. Okay, the sentence sounds like this. It's right in the 6th step. It says, a well-loved clergyman. Interesting how clergymen are involved. It was involved with Bill Wilson too. When he was trying to figure out what the problem was, why he was 23 years sober and suicidal and going down the tubes, what was the problem? And he said, I know there's an answer because there's some people, once in a while you run into somebody who seems to have broken the sound barrier. He says he called them the benighted ones. He said, perhaps they will be the spearhead of the next major development in Alcoholics Anonymous, and he never says what the next major development is. And there's no book that says what the next major development is. He does give a hint. And the hint he gives, he says, my real problem was dependency. Dependency on people, places, things, this world, and my dependency on AA. My dependency on AA. Because if you think AA is the answer, the only answer, you may be settling for staying sober for a while missing maybe another answer. You may be stunting your growth. And you know what he stared at? You know what he stared at? And he said, he stared at the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi. You know that prayer? He stared at that prayer, written way before AA. And he said, the answer, I knew the answer was in that prayer. I knew the answer was in that prayer. Why can't I get it? He knew the answer was in non-conference approved material. And things got so painful for him, he was forced to look at non-conference approved material. That's why it says we lose prejudice even against religious people. We see where they may be right. Things got so painful for him, he had to start looking at what the steps were all about. And what the steps were all about was there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. So what good does it do for a man to, gain the whole world and lose his soul? What difference does it make if you don't make the difference? What difference does it make if you memorize the big book and you've done the steps 1 million times and you sponsor 2 million people and you're doing all this if you're still unhappy and you worry about what other people think about you? What difference does it make if you can't even talk to anybody about it because you've got intellectual pride and you're scared to talk to people because you're worried what they're thinking about it? And they're not talking about any of this stuff in AA meetings. They're just talking about don't drink and go to meetings. And you haven't had a drink in 5 years or 10 years. And you're just lonely, or you're worried about a romantic partner, or a man or a woman. What difference does it make? So the bottom line is, so the bottom line is so step 7, let me read you a sentence in step 7. A couple of sentences. This step so specifically concerns itself with humility, whatever that is. That's what it concerns itself with. What does humility mean? The attainment of greater humility is the foundation principle of every step in AA. Did you know that? Did you know that every step in AA is about humility? Did anybody ever tell you that? I don't know what you probably thought it was about figuring out your defects in character. That's what you thought it was. You thought it was about making amends, right? Did you know that every step is about attaining humility? I guess making amends is a humbling thing. Looking at who you are, I guess that's humbling. I guess bending your knees to God is humbling. You know what's be real humbling? Going to a group of people and worrying about what they think about you and talking about God anyway. Maybe that's humbling. Here's a sentence. We never apologize for God. We're never ashamed of God. All men of faith have courage. Did you know all men of faith have courage? You know what that means? That means if you don't have faith, you're a coward. You live a life of fear. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. Well, if that's true, if all men of faith have courage, and we never apologize for God, and there is one who has some power, that is God, and God must be the central factor of your life, and there is no middle-of-the-road solution. If all that is true, then you really should be able to talk about it. But what if you can't talk about it because you're worried about what other people think about you? Well, then you're really not sober, are you? You're not emotionally sober. You can't claim sobriety. Well, you can claim that you've beaten the symptom, but you can't claim that you really have dealt with the dis-ease that centers in your mind because you still live the life of a phony liar, don't you? Because all you're trying to do is get other people to like you, and you're scared to even talk about the most important thing in the book, right? That's got to be a crummy way of living life. I know it's a crummy way because that's the way I lived my life before I came to AA, and that's the way I lived my life for many years after I came. It says, indeed, the attainment of great humility is the foundation principle of each of AA's 12 steps. Without some degree of humility, no alcohol can stay sober at all, and nearly all AAs, that would be talking about people like you and me, nearly all AAs have found, too, that unless they develop much more of a precious quality that may be required for just physical sobriety, they still haven't much chance of becoming happy. They still haven't much chance of becoming happy. Takes a lot of humility to bend. You know, it says in the big book, it says, all men of faith have courage, they trust their God. They never apologize for God. It repeats it again. Instead, they let him demonstrate what God, through their testimony, what God has done for them in their lives. And it says then, when you can do that and you can testify to what the Lord has done for you, it says, then you begin to outgrow fear. So what would your life be like if you didn't have fear and anxiety? What kind of person would you be? What kind of life would you have if you could outgrow fear and anxiety? Let's say you could talk to AA people in a group just the way I'm talking to them like now and talk about the stuff I'm talking about. You know, whereas I've heard say many times, I never hear that in any of the groups I go to. I talk about it all the time in all the groups I go to. How come I can do it and you can't? Why can't you do it? Well, because you have to take a different road. You got to take the road less traveled. They talk about it in the big book. It's all over the big book, by the way. But you got to look at the sentences. You can't get bollocksed up by the paragraphs where they say, you know, there's sentences that talk about God. Hey, how about this one? Hear about that? But we won't know. This is the last page, but we won't know you. We cannot be sure because your real reliance must be on God. He will show you how to create the fellowship you crave. It's going to be a godly fellowship where they talk about God, not one where they tell you don't talk about God, you're killing newcomers. See to your relationship with him is right. With God is right. Great events will come to pass for you and countless others. So you got basically, ultimately what happens in AA is you have two groups of people. You have people that are focused on God. Well, like Bob knew this stuff. Bob's the guy who said the books we found absolutely essential were 1 Corinthians 13, Sermon on the Mount, Book of James. Bob is the one who, if you ask him what's this about, he'd say, look at the book, the good book. If you ask Bob, what does first things first mean? If you ask Bob Smith, he'd say, seeking first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, all things will be added unto you. If you look at how Bob 12-stepped, this is in Doc Bob the Good Old Timers, book that Selden read, on how he 12-stepped Clarence the Snyder, first question he asked him is, do you believe in God? First question. He's lying in a hospital. Do you believe in God? He says, what does that have to do with it? He says, everything. That's the sentence. Everything is the sentence. Well, I guess I do. Guess nothing. You either do or you don't. Well, I do. Good. Now get down off the hospital bed. We're going to pray. I don't know how to pray. Just do what I tell you to do. And he told him to say the sinner's prayer. And then, as Clarence said in the book, Dr. Bob in the Good Old Times, he says, I did what I was ordered to do. There was no suggestion. That's AA. That's the next frontier. That's the spearhead to the next frontier, going back to the way they did it back then, where you can get into a meeting unless you get down on your knees. And I can tell you what, those meetings were a little bit different because nobody got up and got pissed off and walked out because of the God thing, because the only way they got in is they had to say they believed in God. They had to bend the knee, you know? So what does that have to do with anything? Okay, so how's this? So here's the deal. My wife told me, I think I've told you this story. I'm going to do this real fast, okay? I can't give you the whole thing. So I have this wonderful wife. I have this beautiful baby. I have this beautiful house. She says, you come home drunk one more time, I'm leaving you. That's the sentence, 12 words. You come home drunk. I was sober when she said it. You know, I was a division chief of the state's attorney's office trying murder cases. You know, I'm not stupid. I got all sorts of diplomas on the wall that testify as to I've been educated far beyond my capacity to understand shit. And the bottom line is that so I get in my car, you know, and I've been going out every night for, you know, out until 4 o'clock in the morning, looking at all the blondes and brunettes and redheads, saying to myself, never cheated, but saying to myself, if I wasn't married, I could go out with that one. I'd go out with this one. You know what I mean? You know, that's the deal. And she says, you come on drunk one more time, I'm leaving you. I get in my car, I drive 3 blocks, I stop the red light. That's a sentence. If you come home drunk one, and I say to myself, what the hell do you mean by that? Clear-cut directions. You see, that's what an alcoholic does with clear-cut directions. What an alcoholic does with a sentence like, you come home drunk with me, you're saying, what the fuck is that all about? You know, that's clear-cut directions. I go into the bar. Doug Hartman puts his arm around me. He says, Russell, you're a great guy. Your wife will never leave you. We all love you. You're the greatest guy in the world. You say, man, that's exactly what I was thinking. And I was sober when I said that. And I have a couple of drinks, then a couple more, and 4 o'clock in the morning I leave, and that's the end of the marriage. You know? You know why? Because I had to travel that road. I couldn't travel the road less traveled. I couldn't travel. I had no choice. So I'm sitting there with the marriage counselor. The marriage counselor asked my wife, because she wanted to try to get together again. We had a baby and everything like that, and she was a woman of integrity, and he asked her, how do you want to change Russell? She said something. I wasn't listening. I had a date with a redhead. I said, man, they're dragging me back into this thing, you know? And he says, Russ, how do you want to change your wife? I said, I just want to date other women. That was it. I was as sober as I am right now when I said that. I could not, I don't know how to explain this. I could not say that. I'm an alcoholic. I don't do stupid, evil things to people and rip their hearts out because I'm drinking. I do that sober. I'm an evil shit sober. I'm a selfish evil shit. You know, you're nicer alcoholics. I can tell that. But I'm not a nice alcoholic. But I had no choice. So I come to Alcoholics Anonymous. My sponsors pick me up every night at 5:30. Every night at 5:30 he picks me up. We go out to dinner. He pays for dinner. I love this guy. You know, I know he really likes me. He pays for dinner. And then we go to a meeting. And then after the meeting, we go out and everything like that. And we just have a great time. And I go, and I'm sitting in bed. And I know my sponsor is going to call. And I start watching a rerun of Star Trek. One I've seen 10 times. And I'm really getting into the Star Trek therapy. You know what I mean? It's a real good, I know what's going to happen, but I'm really getting into Star Trek. And I'm thinking, and now I'm getting tired. I'm into Star Trek. And I'm thinking my sponsor is going to call me up. And I want to really watch the Star Trek thing. And then all of a sudden I start feeling my neck, and I had mononucleosis, but so I know what's going on. My glands are swelling up real big. I can hardly talk. I can't even swallow. I know I'm getting mononucleosis. And my sponsor calls me up and says, so Russ, where do you want to go to dinner? And I said, Bob, I don't think I can go. My glands are swollen, and I think I have mononucleosis, and I don't think I can go. And he says, you know, Russell, when you start making excuses for not going to meetings, maybe you're thinking it's okay to drink again. And all of a sudden my glands went down. I swear to God, it's a true story. It's a true story. I was incapable. You know, the greatest thing that happened to me, thank God I had a sponsor who could do that to me. How did he know I wasn't sick? I put on a real good act. How did he know that? And you know what the interesting thing is that I was incapable of getting out of that bed, as sick as I was. You know what I mean? If he had allowed me to get away with it, the next time it would have been something else. It would have been something, and you know, I wouldn't have 45 years now. I'd be one of those guys, well, I had a lot of time, but now I have 90 days. You know, because I was incapable of making the choice. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was still incapable of making choices, but the longer I stayed around and I hung around these people, they would make the choice for me. He says, you're going to make the coffee tonight. I didn't want to make the coffee. I made the coffee because I had to make the coffee. Because I had to be the whatever, the chairman, or the head guy, whatever, the group guy, when you own a group, what is that thing when the secretary, you got to be the secretary of this group. You got to do this. You got to sponsor this. I did all these things people told me to do. If you saw me do any service for the first 10 years, is because some sponsor said, you need to do this. You need to be the intergroup banquet chair. You need to get involved in this. You need to you need to be on relay for 8 years. It was because somebody else had the idea. And then one day I ran into somebody and they told me this. They said, because I was dying, I had 10 years and I was dying at AA. And I hadn't left them. I was going to 3 meetings a day. I was sponsoring everything that moved. I was even speaking. I was doing these step series all over the place. You know what I mean? People were listening to me, and all this sort of stuff. And I was dying, It's very hard to tell people you're dying and you're suicidal and you're lonely and you don't know what to do when you're doing the step series that night. You know what I'm talking about? It's a difficult sort of situation because of the pride, because you have no humility. Because you have no humility, and I was dying, so I told one guy what the problem is. He says, you need to go to Bible study. He says, you need to go to Bible study. He said, oh, no, Bible's bad. I think AA is, I don't think that's conference approved. I don't think so. I don't think it's conference approved. I hadn't read the Dr. Bob Good Old Timers. I didn't realize that that's what they were doing. That's all the stuff they were doing. They weren't reading the big book. And so I told him I was spiritual. He said, you don't understand, I'm spiritual. Can't you tell? I'm spiritual, not religious. And he said, well, I don't care. Don't go. I'm just telling you what you need to do. Because I had forgotten the whole point of the whole deal of doing the steps and everything. The whole point of all this stuff that we do is not to avoid believing in God, but to find God now. That's just a sentence. But there's all these sentences around that sentence. So you do all the work and you do everything, and you wind up being the perfect AA, but you have no relationship with God. You have a relationship with your car and for your wife and with your job and all this stuff because you're in love with the things of this world. You're addicted to them. And therefore you fall in the same category that Bill fell into. I wanted God, I needed him, and he came. He came. But soon his presence was blotted out by worldly clamors, mostly within myself. So I became a guy that was all AA, and I was all chasing after everything in the world. And God was something I pulled out of my pocket in the glove compartment when I went up to the room and I said the Lord's Prayer, the Serenity Prayer. And he asked me if I believed in God. I said, yeah, I believed in God. If he asked me who he was or anything like that, I had no idea what you're talking about. Do you believe God? I had no idea what you're talking about. So you know what I had to do? I had to leave AA. I never left AA. I never did one of these things I went to. I had to leave that group of people that were walking on the broad highway, you know what I mean? I had to go to another group of people. And there was some, believe it or not, there were some alcoholics with 50 years in that group. I had to go to another group. It was called the Bible study. And all of a sudden I started focusing on that and going to AA. And then not only did I not drink and go to meetings and do all the steps, but I also found the God of my understanding. And I started reading another book, the same book Dr. Bob was reading. When he said to Bill Wilson his last words, he says, let's not screw this thing up, keep it simple. And then I started reading that book. And then you know what I started doing? I stopped looking at blondes, brunettes, and redheads. I started cherishing my wife and my children. And I started cherishing the people in AA. And I gave up golf because it took too much time, 4 hours. And I'd rather spend 4 hours trying to help alcoholics. And I made that choice. And I didn't make that choice because the sponsor told me I had to make that choice. I made that choice because I had a God and I knew what God wanted me to do. And I believed my God. And he said, your job is to be of maximum purpose to God and other people. And you need to help other people and love on other people and treat everybody like they have a broken heart, because they probably do. And then something amazing happened. I started doing that. And I didn't even do it because I first started doing it because I thought I had to do it in order to please God, because it's payback for God, because I was grateful to God, because Bill Wilson said the Lord has been so wonderful to me, curing me of this disease. I got to keep talking about and telling the people. And then I started enjoying it. And then I started my wife said, well, let's go on a cruise. I said, yeah, man, if I go on a cruise, I'll miss my meetings. And all of a sudden I started enjoying helping other people. And then you're in real fucking trouble. When your life becomes, the enjoyment of your life is not playing golf or buying a new car or any of that stuff. not the things of this world, but your whole life is about trying to help other people and point them in a direction that maybe AA is not really pointing them in. Does that make it? You understand what I'm saying? And then an amazing thing happened. I started talking about other people, talking at groups, at meetings, at conventions about God and what God had done to me. You don't give them this kind of a deal. You know what I mean? And it became natural to me. It became easy to me because I didn't apologize for God. I wasn't ashamed of God because I don't know how this happened, but I lost fear of whether they liked me or not. I lost fear of whether people liked me or not in AA. And when I started losing fear of whether people liked me or not in AA, I lost fear of whether people liked me or not outside of AA. And then I lost fear of being judged by other people. And then the next thing I knew, I never thought of other people in my mind. I didn't have a whole bunch of people in my mind. And I didn't even have to make a lot of amends because the only time you have to make amends is when you hurt people. And I stopped hurting people. I just stopped hurting people, And so you see, it's a little bit different with me now. You understand? It's a little different with me now. My life has changed. And I stopped worrying about dying. I've had cancer 3 times. They told me, it's okay. It's okay. As my sponsor, John Glenn, used to say, my bags are packed. I'm ready to go. So all I could do, so I come here, and so I'm saying, well, I'm going to talk about my life, and I'm talking about what happened to me, and it may not happen to you, and you may think it's screwy, but I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be at least transparent, right? Right? So, when it goes to my mind, that little thought that goes to your mind, but you tell them all that, somebody's not going to like you. Well, you throw a rock into a pack of dogs, the one that yelps the loudest is the one that gets hit. Is the one that gets hit. So you get to decide. You get to make a choice. You get to make a choice. Do you go down the broad highway, let everybody, do you conform yourself? It says, do not conform yourself to the world, but be transformed by God. And in the big book, it says, become reborn. So you get to make a choice somewhere along the line. Are you going to just be another AA person? Don't drink and go to meetings. Be a nice AA person. Don't say anything that may upset people. Or are you going to take the road less traveled? That's your choice. But there are consequences to these choices. This world has a lot of worldly clamors, and it's 24/7. 24/7. They never stop. And they don't necessarily come at you because you did something wrong as a consequence of your action. Also, sometimes they do. Sometimes you just get beat over the head. And the older you get, the more likely you're going to get beat over the head. Not because you're stupid, but because, you're going to get cancer. People are going to die. There's going to be stuff happening. My younger brother is in the hospital, and my baby brother, I've got to watch over him now. I got kids, things happen all around you that you have to be concerned about, and things are going to happen with you in your life. You think you're worried about yourself. How about worrying about yourself, your wife, your kids, your grandkids, the people that work for you in your office and stuff. It gets more complicated. It's a big difference between just worrying about your little old self and then being concerned with everything else that's going on as the world is coming at you. Because your landlord doesn't come up to you and say, you don't have to pay the rent because we know you're in AA and you want to be sober, so we're letting you slide. You understand what I'm saying? And the only thing that protects you from the world and the worldly clamors, and Bill Wilson learned this, is faith in God. Because all men and women who have faith have courage. They trust their God. And you go to the AA room and you say something like that, and some old fart comes up to you and says, you got to cool down. God thinks you're pissing off people. Right? So you'll figure it out. You'll figure it out. Or not. You'll figure it out or not. But if you ever get to the point where you got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years or something like that in there, and you find that you're not feeling good and you don't know what the answer is because you're doing everything they're telling you, it maybe has something to do with what we're talking about right here. Maybe you'll look back at this talk and say, I think that's what that guy was talking about. Because that's how we grow up, through pain. It's the touchstone, the pain. So thank you very much.